The little girl spoke softly, almost shy, but her words detonated inside the hangar like an explosive charge. My mom had that same tattoo. 5 Navy SEALs froze, not metaphorically, not emotionally, physically, boots locked to concrete, hands stopped mid-motion, muscles hardened in trained stillness, the kind that only comes from years of conditioning where movement could mean death. The hangar at Naval Base Coronado was loud by nature, rotors winding down, generators humming, distant radios crackling, but in that instant it felt like the air itself had been cut. Lieutenant Daniel Rourke felt it first in his chest. A pressure, a cold recognition. He followed the little girl's finger. She was pointing at Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hale's wrist. At the tattoo, a small, precise black trident etched into skin weathered by salt, sun, and war. The SEAL Trident. Hale didn't look down. He already knew. Every man on Team 7 knew. Because that tattoo didn't just represent a unit, it represented a lineage, a promise, and a history that officially said women were never there. Yet the girl stood there, ponytail crooked, hoodie sleeves hanging past her hands, looking up at them with innocent certainty. "My mom had it," she repeated. "Right there." No one corrected her. No one could. SEALs weren't trained to freeze. They trained for chaos, for ambush, for explosions that erased doors and men alike. They trained to move while afraid. But this wasn't fear. This was something deeper. This was recognition of a truth they were never supposed to hear spoken aloud. Lieutenant Rourke forced himself to breathe. He was 28 years old, lean, sharp-eyed, with the controlled posture of a man who had learned early that calm was contagious. His uniform was immaculate. His voice usually low enough that men leaned in to hear him. He had led Team 7 through 3 combat deployments: Afghanistan, Syria, somewhere else he'd never be allowed to name. But this wasn't on any mission brief. He glanced at Hale. Hale's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped. To Hale's left, Petty Officer Evan Cross, the youngest man on the team, stared openly. Cross was barely 24, still new enough to carry awe alongside experience. His hand hovered near his rifle like he wasn't sure what threat he was facing. Across from them stood the woman, hands cuffed in front of her, civilian jacket, worn boots, hair pulled back tight like she'd never learned how to let it down. Her eyes met Rourke's, and she knew. She knew exactly what had just happened. Naval Base Coronado never slept. Even at night, it breathed like a living thing. The distant thud of waves against the shore, the whine of turbines, the echo of boots on concrete as night crews rotated through invisible routines. The hangar doors were half open, letting in a strip of coastal fog that curled along the floor like smoke. Team 7 had been prepping for a classified escort mission. Low threat, no engagement expected, transfer only. That alone made Rourke uneasy. In his experience, low threat was what people said when they didn't want questions. The briefing had been thin: asset transfer, witness protection, secure government installation to secondary location. No names, no context, just orders. Rourke had learned long ago that when details were missing, they were missing on purpose. Now a child had just spoken a sentence that didn't belong anywhere near a classified operation. The woman stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Emily," she said gently. "Come sit back down, sweetheart." The girl hesitated, looked at Hale again, then back at her mother. "She really did," Emily insisted. "The same one. I know," the woman said softly. "I know." She guided Emily back to the folding chair near the hangar wall and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. That was when Rourke noticed it, the way she positioned herself. Body angled slightly outward, shoulder between her child and the armed men, eyes constantly scanning. Not fear, training. Rourke stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his tone neutral, respectful. "For the record, what's your name?" One of the federal escorts snapped his head around. "Lieutenant, you are not authorized." The woman spoke anyway. "Sarah," she said. Then, after a fraction of a second, Sarah Keller. The name hit like a suppressed gunshot. Quiet, but lethal. Hale inhaled sharply. Cross's eyes widened. Rourke felt something cold slide down his spine, because that name wasn't just familiar. It was legendary. Sarah Keller, .call sign, Raven. A name whispered through training pipelines and late-night barracks conversations. A story instructors never officially confirmed, but never denied either. The first woman to pass a black site selection program so classified it didn't officially exist. Deep reconnaissance, counter-terror operations, deniable missions where failure meant erasure. 10 years ago, Raven had vanished during a mission in Eastern Europe, official report, KIA. Body unrecovered, mission compromised, unofficially, no one knew, except maybe the men standing in that hangar. Hale found his voice first. That's impossible, he said quietly. Raven died in... I didn't, Sarah said. No anger, no bitterness, just fact. I survived. Barely. The federal escort stepped forward, hand on his weapon. That's enough. Lieutenant, we're done here. Rourke didn't move. Neither did his team, because if Sarah Keller was alive, then everything they'd been told was a lie. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah rolled up her left sleeve. There it was, faded slightly with time, but unmistakable. The seal trident, perfectly inked, perfectly placed, earned. Hale swallowed hard. Only men who passed one of the most brutal selection processes on Earth wore that symbol, or so the world believed. Cross whispered, Jesus. Rourke felt the weight of command press down on him. If this woman was who she said she was, then this mission wasn't an escort. It was a containment operation, and the enemy wasn't overseas. The child who shouldn't exist. Emily swung her legs, unaware she'd just cracked open a decade-old grave. Rourke crouched in front of her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily Keller," she said proudly. Keller. The name settled everything. Rourke stood. "Chief," he said quietly to Hale, "prep the bird." The escort frowned. "That's not your call, it is now," Rourke replied. Because something inside him had shifted, a line had been crossed, and Lieutenant Daniel Rourke had been raised in a military family that believed one thing above all else: if the truth shows up in front of you, you don't look away. The helicopter lifted off Coronado just after Oro 200. Rotor wash tore through the fog, scattering it across the tarmac like a secret fleeing exposure. The hangar shrank beneath them, lights blurring into yellow streaks as the aircraft climbed over the black water of the Pacific. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. SEAL Team 7 sat strapped in, weapons secured but close. Helmets on, night vision mounts flipped up, faces half-lit by red cabin lights that turned skin into something almost unreal. Lieutenant Daniel Rourke sat opposite Sarah Keller. Between them, Emily slept. Her head rested against her mother's side, small fingers curled into the fabric of Sarah's jacket like an anchor. The soft rise and fall of her chest was the only thing in the aircraft that looked peaceful. Rourke watched Sarah carefully. She sat upright despite the cuffs, back straight, eyes alert. She'd positioned herself so that if the helicopter went down, her body would shield Emily first. That alone told him everything. This woman hadn't been protected, she'd been surviving. Chief Marcus Hale leaned closer to Rourke, voice low enough to be swallowed by the engine noise. "If she's really Raven," he said, "then this op is dirty." Rourke nodded slightly. "I know. Sir, permission to speak freely? You never needed permission for that, Chief." Hale exhaled through his nose. Then someone very high up wanted her buried, quietly, with paperwork. Rourke didn't answer. He was thinking about the briefing, how thin it had been, how the escorts hadn't worn insignia, how Emily hadn't been listed anywhere, and how the transfer destination wasn't SOCOM, or NCIS, or even a standard black site. It was labeled simply as Secure Government Installation, Domestic. Domestic. That word should have made him push back harder from the start. Halfway through the flight, Rourke made a decision. He reached across the narrow aisle and knelt. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm going to remove your restraints." One of the federal escorts snapped his head up. "Lieutenant," Rourke didn't look at him. "This aircraft is under my authority," he said evenly. "And I will not transport a mother in cuffs in front of her child." The escort hesitated, then said nothing. Rourke unlocked the cuffs. Sarah rubbed her wrists once, then looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice carried something Rourke hadn't expected. Not relief. Recognition. "You still don't trust me," Rourke said. "No," Sarah replied, "but I respect you." He met her gaze. "That makes two of us." Minutes passed, The helicopter droned onward through the darkness. Finally, Sarah spoke. They told you this was witness protection. Yes. She gave a short, humorless smile. That's what they always say when they don't want operators asking questions. Rourke leaned back against the bulkhead. Then tell me the truth. She looked down at Emily, then back at him. The truth is, she said, your government lost control of a program it never wanted acknowledged. And when that happens, people don't get retired. Hale stiffened. They get erased. Sarah nodded. There was a unit before policy caught up, Sarah began. Before the Pentagon could decide how it felt about women in direct action roles, Cross leaned in, unable to help himself. You mean unofficial operators? Deniable, Sarah corrected. Highly trained, never acknowledged. Used where plausible deniability mattered more than medals. She paused. We didn't wear unit patches. We didn't get citations. And if we died, we never existed. Rourke's jaw tightened. How many? He asked. Sarah shrugged slightly. Enough. The cabin felt smaller. 10 years ago, she continued, my team was inserted into Eastern Europe. Objective, retrieve a data package from a compromised intelligence broker. What kind of data? Hale asked. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Names, she said finally. Bank accounts. Proof that certain U.S. officials were selling classified intel to foreign actors. Silence fell like a weight. That kind of information, Cross said slowly, would collapse careers, governments, Sarah corrected. We got the data, Sarah said. But exfil never came. Rourke felt his stomach knot. They burned you, he said. Yes. How? Our location was leaked. Hostiles hit us from 2 sides. Someone knew exactly where we'd be. She closed her eyes briefly. My team died buying me time. I was wounded. Captured. Emily stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Sarah's voice dropped even lower. They didn't expect me to survive. When I did, I became a liability. Rourke felt the truth assembling itself, piece by piece. You escaped. I was released, Sarah said. As part of a deal I never agreed to. They told me I was dead, Sarah continued. Officially, that my name would never appear again. Hale's hands clenched into fists. And Emily? Rourke asked quietly. They took her, Sarah said, for 2 years. Cross sucked in a sharp breath. They said they were protecting her, Sarah went on. They said if I cooperated, if I disappeared quietly, she'd be safe. And if you didn't? Hale asked. They'd raise her without me. The helicopter's engine roared, but none of them heard it anymore. Rourke felt a slow, controlled anger settle in his chest. Not rage, something colder. The helicopter began its descent. Below them, the desert stretched out like an ocean of darkness. No city lights, no roads, just an expanse broken by a single cluster of illumination. Concrete fences, guard towers, the secure government installation. Rourke recognized the layout instantly. Not military, federal, the kind of place where oversight went to die. As they touched down, Sarah spoke one last time. They're not done, she said. They're moving me because something is about to surface. What? Rourke asked. She met his eyes. The data. The moment the helicopter doors opened, floodlights snapped on. Armed personnel swarmed the landing zone. Too many, too fast. Weapons raised. No unit markings. No courtesy. Rourke stepped out first, posture calm but deliberate. This transfer is under my command, he said. Stand down. A man in a dark suit approached from the shadows, late 40s, clean haircut, eyes like polished stone. You've exceeded your authorization, Lieutenant, the man said. We'll take it from here. Rourke felt Hale shift behind him. Protective, instinctive. No, Rourke replied. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The suit smiled thinly. You don't understand what you're interfering with. Rourke held his gaze. Then explain it. The man's smile vanished. This woman is property of the United States government. Sarah laughed softly behind him. That's when I knew, she said. You were the wrong kind of officer for them. Weapons came up, safeties clicked. For a fraction of a second, America aimed rifles at itself. Emily woke. She looked around, confused. Mom? She whispered. Sarah pulled her close. Rourke felt something inside him settle. A decision forming. He turned his head slightly. Chief, he said calmly, if this goes sideways, extract the child first. Hale didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. The suit raised a hand. Lieutenant, you are about to ruin your career. Rourke met his eyes. I swore an oath, he said. Not to you, not to your office. The suit's voice hardened. Last warning. Rourke reached up and keyed his radio. Command, he said clearly. This is Lieutenant Daniel Rourke, SEAL Team 7. I am invoking whistleblower protection and requesting immediate JAG oversight. All channels open. The desert wind howled. The suit went pale, because secrets only survive in silence, and Lieutenant Rourke had just broken it. The desert didn't care. It didn't care about rank or secrets or the men standing under floodlights with rifles raised at one another. The wind moved across the sand the same way it always had, cold, indifferent, ancient. But inside the perimeter of that secure government installation, history paused. Lieutenant Daniel Rourke stood perfectly still. His radio hissed softly, the open channel carrying his last words outward. Recorded, logged, impossible to erase. The man in the dark suit stared at him like a chess player who had just realized the board was rigged. You don't know what you've done, the suit said quietly. Rourke didn't blink. I know exactly what I've done. Behind him, SEAL Team 7 tightened their formation without being told. Not aggressive, defensive. A living wall between Sarah Keller, her daughter, and the guns now aimed at them. This wasn't training. This was the moment soldiers dreaded and prepared for without ever admitting it could happen. Friendly weapons, friendly targets. Lower your weapons, the suit ordered his men. They didn't move. Not because they wanted to fire, but because no one wanted to be the first to back down. Authority hung in the air like a loaded round. Rourke broke the silence. Everyone here needs to understand something, he said, voice calm, carrying easily across the open space. This situation is now under legal review. Any unlawful action from this point forward will be documented and prosecuted. One of the guards shifted uneasily. Another glanced at his partner. Fear didn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looked like hesitation. The suit's jaw tightened. You're overstepping, Lieutenant. No, Rourke replied. I'm standing exactly where my oath put me. Sarah watched the exchange with the stillness of someone who had already survived worse. She leaned down to Emily, whispering in her ear. No matter what happens, stay with Chief Hale. Do you understand? Emily nodded, eyes wide but dry. She had learned young not to cry when adults raised their voices. Sarah straightened and spoke into the tension. You know what the real problem is? She said to the suit. You needed me to stay quiet forever. The suit ignored her. That was never going to happen, Sarah continued, because you made one mistake. Now he looked at her. You let me live. The words landed harder than any accusation. Rourke's radio crackled. SEAL 7, this is command. Acknowledge. Rourke lifted it. Rourke here. There was a pause. Too long. Then, Lieutenant, stand by. Hale leaned close. Sir, that didn't sound reassuring. No, Rourke murmured. It didn't. Minutes dragged. No one lowered their weapons. The floodlights buzzed faintly, insects drawn to the heat. Then another voice came through, older, steadier. This is Rear Admiral Thomas Keegan. Rourke stiffened. Keegan was no one's fool. A career officer, known for clean operations and quiet authority. Lieutenant Rourke, Keegan continued, you are ordered to secure your team and comply with the transfer. Rourke swallowed once. Admiral, he said carefully, with respect, I believe this transfer involves unlawful detention and suppression of evidence related to national security crimes. Silence. Then Keegan spoke again. Slower now. Lieutenant, you are treading dangerous ground. Yes, sir, Rourke replied, but I'm standing on it. Inside the installation, cameras recorded everything. Inside offices thousands of miles away, men and women watched screens with tightening expressions. This was never supposed to happen. Sarah Keller was supposed to vanish quietly, another classified footnote sealed behind legal language and time. Instead, 5 SEALs had put her existence on the record, and worse, a child had witnessed it. The system didn't fear whistleblowers. It feared proof. The suit stepped closer to Rourke, lowering his voice. Lieutenant, if you don't stand down, you and your men will be detained. Hale laughed softly. By who? He asked. You? The suit's eyes flicked to Hale, then back to Rourke. You're risking court-martial, he said. Prison. The end of everything you've built. Rourke nodded. I know. And you're still doing this? Rourke looked past him, to Sarah, to Emily, to the trident tattoo faded but unbroken. Yes, he said, because courage wasn't loud. It was stubborn. The order came without warning. Detain the lieutenant. Two guards stepped forward. Hale moved instantly, placing himself between them and Rourke, hand raised but weapon still slung. Bad idea, Hale said calmly. Cross shifted, eyes sharp, fingers ready. The guards hesitated, then the radio crackled again. Stand down, Admiral Keegan's voice snapped. All personnel, stand down. The guards froze. The suit turned sharply. Admiral, you can't be serious. I am, Keegan replied. This matter is now under JAG review and congressional oversight. The suit's face drained of color. Escort personnel, Keegan continued. You are relieved. The words echoed across the landing zone like a verdict. Weapons lowered. Slowly, reluctantly. The standoff dissolved, not with gunfire, but with paperwork, authority, and a truth too big to bury again. Sarah exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Emily clutched Hale's hand. Are we safe? She asked. Hale crouched, meeting her eyes. Yeah, kid. For now. Rourke turned away, heart pounding. He knew what came next. Investigations. Interviews, careers weighed and measured. He also knew he would do it again. Hours later, inside a secured briefing room, Rourke sat alone. No weapons, no team, just a recorder and a man in a uniform older than the walls. You understand, the Admiral said quietly, that what you did will follow you. Yes, sir. And you understand, Keegan continued, that there are people who will never forgive this. Rourke nodded. Keegan studied him for a long moment, then said, There are also people who will sleep better tonight. The Admiral stood. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, this institution survives because men like you refuse to look away. In another room, Sarah Keller spoke into a microphone. Not as Raven, not as an asset, as a soldier. She named names, laid out timelines, submitted the data she'd hidden for a decade. Every word carried the weight of the dead. When she finished, the room was silent. No applause, no congratulations, just the understanding that something irreversible had begun. Truth does not arrive gently. It arrives like gravity. Quiet, relentless, and impossible to escape. Within 24 hours of the desert standoff, Naval Base Coronado became something else entirely. Doors that had always been open were suddenly locked. Conversations stopped when certain people entered the room. Phones rang and rang, then went dead. Lieutenant Daniel Rourke felt it immediately. The machine had awakened. Rourke sat alone in a windowless room beneath the operations building. The walls were painted a shade of gray meant to calm people down. It never worked. A recorder blinked red on the table. Across from him sat a JAG officer and a civilian investigator whose badge never left his jacket. State your name and rank for the record, the JAG officer said. Lieutenant Daniel Rourke, he replied evenly. United States Navy, do you understand the seriousness of your actions? Rourke nodded once. Yes, and would you do it again? The civilian leaned forward slightly. Rourke didn't hesitate. Yes. The room went quiet. The investigator made a note. They separated the team immediately. Standard procedure, they called it. Hale was reassigned to temporary administrative duty. Cross was pulled from the rotation schedule. The others were buried under training evaluations. No charges, no explanations, just distance. That hurt more than confinement ever could. In the gym late one night, Hale found Rourke alone, punching the heavy bag until his knuckles split. You all right, sir? Hale asked. Rourke stopped, flexed his hands. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I'm not wrong. Hale nodded slowly. That'll have to be enough. In a secure interview room miles away, Sarah Keller stared at her own name on a screen, or what remained of it. Redactions covered entire pages like scars. Officially, the investigator said, you were never deployed. Sarah smiled without humor. Then who buried my team? No one answered. She described missions that never existed, cities that burned quietly in the night, targets neutralized without flags or press releases, orders delivered face-to-face, never written down, and then she described the betrayal, the leak, the ambush. The moment she realized her extraction wasn't late, it was canceled. One investigator finally spoke. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Sarah's voice didn't rise. Because I had a child, she said, and they reminded me every day what they could do to her. Emily. The unbroken thread. Emily sat in a temporary housing unit, coloring quietly while a family services officer pretended not to watch her too closely. She drew helicopters, men in uniforms, a woman with a small black tattoo on her wrist. Who's that? The officer asked gently. My mom, Emily replied. She's strong. That drawing would later be entered into evidence. Not officially, but everyone who saw it remembered. The retaliation came quietly. Rourke's fitness reports were delayed. His promotion board packet went missing. A reassignment order appeared in his inbox. A desk job, far from operational command. Career suffocation. The oldest punishment in the book. Hale read the order and clenched his jaw. They're trying to break you without touching you. Rourke nodded. Means they're afraid. In a private moment, after the interviews ended for the day, Sarah sat alone and finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of tears that came when vigilance relaxed for the first time in 10 years. Rourke happened to pass the room. He paused, didn't enter, just stood guard in the hallway like a sentry. Some things didn't need words. The files Sarah had hidden were old, but not obsolete. Financial trails, encrypted communications, names still active in government positions. Analysts confirmed what no one wanted, confirmed. She had been telling the truth. The machine had eaten its own, and now it was choking. A decision was made at levels Rourke would never see. Emily Keller would testify, not in court, in deposition, child-safe environment, no cameras, but her testimony mattered more than anyone expected. She described being taken from her mother, being told her mom was gone, being moved from place to place under new names. She also described the tattoo. They told me not to talk about it, she said quietly. But it was important. That sentence changed everything, because intimidation of a child was not deniable. Rear Admiral Keegan stood before a closed committee. He spoke plainly. We failed one of our own, he said. And in doing so, we endangered everything we claimed to protect. There was no applause. There was no dissent, either. The tide had turned. Rourke's choice. Weeks later, Rourke received a final offer. Drop the matter, accept reassignment quietly, keep his career intact. He read it once, deleted it. Then he went for a run along the shoreline, the Pacific cold and endless beside him. Somewhere behind him, the base lights flickered on. He knew what he was giving up. He also knew what he was keeping. History rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with drums or banners or victory speeches. More often, it changes quietly, in closed rooms, in sealed files, in decisions made by people who finally realize the truth has grown too large to ignore. By the time the reckoning came, Lieutenant Daniel Rourke had already accepted what it would cost him. He just didn't know yet what it would give back. The report would never be public. It would never trend, never make headlines, never be argued about on television. But inside the Pentagon, inside oversight committees, and inside classified archives that would one day be declassified long after the principals were gone, Sarah Keller's name was restored, not completely, not loudly, but enough. Her service record was amended, her death designation quietly removed, her missions acknowledged under sealed annexes. She was no longer a ghost. She was a veteran. And for someone who had lived 10 years erased, that mattered more than medals. Not everyone walked away clean. 2 senior intelligence officials resigned for personal reasons. A contractor vanished from government work entirely. An internal office was dissolved and restructured under a new authority. No perp walks, no press conferences. Justice inside systems like this rarely looked dramatic, but it was real and it was permanent. Rear Admiral Keegan signed the final memorandum himself. Then he sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the flag on the wall. Lieutenant Daniel Rourke was removed from operational command, not as punishment, as compromise. He was reassigned to training and ethics oversight, a billet that shaped future officers but never put boots on the ground again. The message was subtle. You were right, but you were inconvenient. Rourke read the orders without expression, then folded them neatly and put them away. That chapter was closed. On their last day together, before reassignment scattered them for good, Team 7 met at the edge of the base. No ceremony, no speeches, just 5 men standing in ocean wind. Hale clapped Rourke on the shoulder. "You did good, sir." Rourke shook his head. "We did," Cross swallowed. "I'd follow you anywhere." Rourke met his eyes. "Then lead well. That's how this spreads." They didn't hug, they didn't salute. They stood there until the sun dipped low and the water turned gold. Some bonds didn't need words. Sarah stood on the same base weeks later. No cuffs, no escorts, just a visitor's badge clipped to her jacket. Emily ran ahead, laughing, chasing seabirds across the concrete. Sarah rolled up her sleeve. The trident was still there, faded, scarred, but unmistakable. A young sailor noticed it and looked twice, then looked away. Some truths didn't need explaining. Rourke found them near the seawall. Emily waved. "Mom, that's him." Sarah smiled. She walked over and stopped in front of Rourke. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she extended her hand. "Thank you," she said. Rourke shook it firmly. "For trusting us." She nodded. "You didn't have to." "I did," he replied. "That's the job." They stood in silence, watching Emily skip stones into the water. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. Rourke considered the question. "No," he said. "I regret the things we let happen when we stay quiet." Sarah exhaled slowly. "So do I." Emily came running back, holding a smooth stone. "Mom," she said, "can I keep it?" Sarah smiled. "Of course." Emily looked up at Rourke. "You're one of the good guys," she said matter-of-factly. Rourke felt something tighten in his chest. "I try to be," he said. She nodded, satisfied, then ran back toward the water. Sarah would never get back the years she lost. Rourke would never return to combat command. The system would never fully admit what it had done. But something had shifted. A line had been drawn. And on the other side of it stood men and women who knew now that silence was not the same as loyalty. The camera pulls back. The base fades into the distance. A woman and her daughter walk along the shore. A young officer stands watching the horizon. 5 SEALs move on to different paths, carrying the same quiet code. And somewhere in the archives, a file once stamped "erased" now reads "served with honor." Courage in the military isn't just about facing an enemy, it's about facing your own side when something is wrong. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it costs you everything you planned for, but it gives you something greater in return. The knowledge that when truth finally stood in front of you, you didn't look away, and that, in the end, is what service really means.